G'day, it's George here again. In this particular video, which is a continuation of the previous one, I want to talk about the relationship between coaching programs and the business improvement strategy. Now, the question we specifically want to answer is this one. How can a coaching program turn training into an element of the execution strategy as opposed to being something on the outside? Now, if you cast your mind back to the previous video, we talked about there being two systems. There's a management operating system which kind of drives or creates a scenario where the business improvement operating system can add value, because it's this system here that we use to close gaps that are taking us away or preventing us from delivering or executing the business plan. So ultimately, the business improvement part of the initiative or the organization is there to help you deliver on your plans at the end of the day. Now, any company that has a business improvement initiative that sits on the side and is separate from that, right, is missing the point on why you would even do business improvement. So one of the problems we get, or one of the problems that, or one of the scenarios that can create a problem, is where training kind of sits on the outside of the organization. Now, the fact that it sits out there is not a bad thing, because the last thing you want to do as a pharmaceutical company or a gas production company or a mining company is become a training organization, right? So that means you go outside and you would bring in someone who's a professional in that field. So not necessarily a bad thing, but it can hamper the organization in a few different ways, which I'll talk about in a second. Now, training itself, the way it normally works is an organization says, we've got this process here where we're going to work on these particular things, we're going to run projects, and then we're going to track and monitor results that come from these. But we need to upskill people so they have the capability of actually working on those projects. So what normally happens is you bring a trainer into the organization, or you send your people to a trainer. Now, the training is then undertaken in some sort of environment, which is a training environment. People sit in a classroom, they'll go through a set of slides or some sort of information delivery where they learn or become aware of some knowledge. Then in most circumstances, particularly when it's decent training, they will then practice that. There'll be some sort of activity or simulation or whatever to practice the pieces that they're learning as they go through the training program. So that's the normal way of doing it. The student then goes back from the training, back to work, and now they're expected to work on projects. Now, one of the problems we get here is where the individual attends training, then they go back to work, but they get caught up in the day-to-day function of work, and then they drift away from actually applying what it is they've learned in the training. Now, let me expand on this a little bit. Training is sitting on the outside here. The element of the business improvement operating system is where we generate results by executing and delivering project work. Now, one of the three problems I'll identify here is this. Onus rests within the organization for the individual to go and do that. There's a separation between what happens here in the execution and the training itself. So they're pulled apart. The second thing is training is learning focused, not result focused. And what that means is the trainer is going to focus on the training and the teaching and the transfer of knowledge and getting people competent in certainly in the short term, understanding and applying some tools in that training environment. And there's no focus of the trainer on going back and driving towards an outcome. So it's training, not coaching in that regard. The last thing is there's the disconnect between learning versus the real world. When we have training sitting out there and then we don't apply it back in here, one of the problems is the pristine, controlled environment of training doesn't reflect the nuances of your industry. It doesn't reflect the culture of people. It doesn't reflect the challenges of working with individual people and personalities and different value sets and different ways of thinking, and people who come in with different emotions. And it also doesn't reflect the problems that we get in dealing with projects, and when every single one of those ones is dealing with an individual and unique problem. So there's so many nuances in the real world, it's very hard to get it back into a training environment. So the way I think about it today is this. We bring a coaching program into play because the intent of the coaching program is to position the upskilling or training element as part of the result program. Now, if we can do that kind of coaching program or set it up that way, we end up in a situation where onus shifts to the individual. So what that means is under the guidance of a coach, they participate in some sort of training, but the coaching continues through to the end of the project. So they're learning something, they're applying it back in the workplace in some sort of activity, and then they run through a project, and there's a continuation of the coaching right to the very end. So the onus is now shifting to the individual to maintain their accountability to the coach, to meet deadlines, to complete tasks under some sort of guided framework or guided structure. The second thing is training becomes a part of the results system as opposed to sitting on the outside. And I think that's an important part of it, because the goal is not to train people. You don't want a training strategy. You want a mechanism for getting results that close gaps in the business and help you deliver your business plan. So when we get that training as part of that system, now people are focused on the right outcome. The last one is there's a reconnection between learning and the real world. So when coaching is undertaken, you have guided training, it can be conducted in a slightly different way, where they learn something or learn a little piece or a tool or something from the toolkit. They then apply that in their own individual workplace. So for example, they might learn process mapping, then they go and map a process that they work in. So there's a connection back to the work, and then it flows into the execution of a project. So the coaching program is more oriented towards what happens back in the business. So when you look at it this way, coaching programs of that nature can be a part of the business improvement operating system, which in fact it should be. It shouldn't sit on the outside as something that's done here and there's a disconnect between what you're trying to achieve, and that is get results at the end of the day. So, I hope that's of interest to you. I hope that kind of clears up some things about how a coaching program can turn training into a part of the results system. If you want more information about it, then you simply send us an email to learning@sorrent.com.au or support@9skillsfactory.com, and we'd love to provide more information about that. So I'm done with that. There's more information if you click the links below about coaching programs and how they specifically relate to the work that we do. There you go. I'll see you in the next video.